Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Well, it's almost time for another season of Michigan football. I don't like summer just flying by, but I am ready for the season, and I know most of you are too. B10 Media Days is next week at Lucas Oil Stadium, and for just about all of us, that signals the start of another much-anticipated season. In the coming weeks, we'll begin previewing this edition of Michigan football, but for now, today, we still have a lot of recruiting news to talk about. The barbecue at the Big House takes place next weekend. It might not be the event it used to be, but it is still a very important recruiting weekend. Not just for the class of 24, but well beyond. We have a long game day segment this week, so let's get right to it. Joining me with all of the latest news is recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine ON3. So stay with us. Here with us on the game day edition of the show to talk about what we are all interested in pretty much all year is recruiting, and the outstanding recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine ON3. Welcome back, EJ.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Well, there are still some big fish in the 2024 recruiting pond that Michigan is after. None bigger than corner Aaron Scott. And I guess we'll know soon, but the question is, can Michigan edge out Ohio State for his services? That is it right now, isn't it, EJ?
Yeah, definitely. So he's set to make his decision on July 30th, which is 9 days from when we're recording this, so the decision's right around the corner. Look, it's going to be tough for him to say no to Ohio State. You know, he grew up in an Ohio State family. His dad is a big Ohio State fan. He's committing on his dad's birthday. He's been up there several times. It's going to be much easier to say yes to Ohio State than it is going to be to say yes to Michigan. Obviously, the Wolverines still feel like they're in this. There's still some optimism around Ann Arbor. They have made this recruitment much tougher for Ohio State than I'm sure the Buckeyes expected. Steve Klingscale has done a fantastic job of building relationships with Scott and those around him. They really impressed Scott and his family. On the official visit in June, the opportunity is there at the corner position. As you know, there's prime opportunity right next to Will Johnson. There's not a true clear-cut starter next to him. Going into the season, now obviously Aaron Scott wouldn't enroll until the following year, but they are selling him on having an open competition next to Will Johnson. Will has been actively involved in this recruitment, spent a lot of time with Aaron Scott on his official visit. Michigan's been pitching him on the villain role, you know, spurning Ohio State and pulling a bit of an upset in similar fashion to Jordan Marshall earlier this cycle, who is also an Ohio native and picked Michigan over Ohio State. Now, again, I think the safe bet here is Ohio State. I don't have a prediction in. If I had to put one in, it would probably be Ohio State, but Michigan, those on the Michigan side do not feel like they are out of this yet. They're still full court press. The commits have been very involved. If you follow social media, you see they're tweeting at Aaron Scott every single day. I was with Devin Baxter yesterday, Michigan's on 300 edge commit, and he told me they're in that group chat with Aaron Scott every day, every hour. So they haven't given up hope yet. They still have some optimism, but while signs point to Ohio State, and I would probably be in that camp, Michigan has exceeded expectations in this recruitment.
It would be a great victory for Michigan if we could pull him up to Ann Arbor, but we'll know soon enough. But yeah, I would be very, very surprised. That would be very tough for him, especially with his dad on his birthday and being an Ohio State family, but we'll know soon enough. I know Bryce Underwood is class of 25, and he's set to make his decision. I think it's on January 6th, but I get so many questions about this kid, more than anything on the recruiting scene. In your opinion, does Michigan still have a really good chance of landing him, EJ?
Yeah, of course. I mean, he's been to Michigan more than any other school, especially here recently. He's visited so many times, including a visit last month. He might be back this coming week as the dead period briefly lifts, though nothing is set in stone. I think that he's developed a great relationship with quarterbacks coach Kurt Campbell. Jim Harbaugh has obviously been personally involved in his recruitment. Guys like Steve Clinkscale and Ron Bellamy, who have deep ties around the Detroit Metro, have been involved as well and have known Bryce since he was an underclassman. He's a sound mind, sound body kid. Obviously, Will Johnson, was the face of sound mind, sound body forever. His father, Dion, an ex-Wolverine, is a co-founder of Sound Mind, Sound Body. You have other guys on the roster from that program like Makari Page and Samaj Morgan. So I think all those connections definitely help. On top of that, if you remember, there was a rift between Michigan and Belleville's head coach, Jermaine Crowell. Crowell has been dismissed after some allegations of recruiting. So you no longer really have that roadblock in front of you as far as not having the high school coach in your corner. I think Michigan's done a great job of rebuilding relationships at Belleville with Crowell out of the picture. So, again, that's a plus. I think if Michigan opens up the offense a little bit more, that'll definitely help. I mean, Bryce is very fond of J.J. McCarthy. He also knows there's, a chance J.J. McCarthy leaves after this season, and there's a possibility he could come in and compete for the starting job as a true freshman. I don't really think Bryce Underwood is afraid of Jaden Davis or anybody, even if Michigan brings in a transfer. I think he sees a potential open competition, and that's certainly appealing to him. With all of this said, I think the schools down south are going to present appealing options as well. Primarily LSU. They've had him on campus a couple of times. I think that, he sees that system as a really good fit for him. So LSU certainly making things interesting. Other southern schools like Alabama and Georgia and Texas have all offered as well. And, I hate to bring this up, but obviously when you have a five-star player at the most important position in the sport, you're going to have NIL involved, I'm sure. And, Michigan's still not doing NIL in the same way as programs from the South, and I'm not expecting Michigan to ever do that. Now, will the Empower presentation that Michigan has been pitching to recruits as of late move the needle, especially later in the process? As everybody has learned, the deeper we go into the recruiting process, the more NIL is prevalent. So interested to see if that becomes a factor in this recruitment as we head closer to his decision date, which, as you mentioned, is January 6th. So this fall will be big, visits, seeing how teams do, potential NIL rise. But to answer your question, yes, I mean, Michigan's going to be right in the thick of things up until his decision date.
Well, sticking with the class of 24, going back to the class of 24 now, the last time you were with us, we talked about top 100 receiver Gatlin Berry. He's from Burley, Idaho. He's set to make his decision, I believe, in August. Is Michigan still the leader for this kid, EJ?
I mean, Michigan felt like they had a really, really good visit, but when I checked in with sources after the OV, they didn't feel like they had an outright lead, which is, why I didn't put in a prediction. Now, if I did have to give a team an edge, if I had to put in a prediction today, it would be Michigan. Like I said, the Wolverines did a fantastic job on the official visit. There's some connections there with Colston Loveland, who's also from Idaho. Colston played for Cameron Anderson at Gooding High School. Coach Anderson recently took the job at Burley, so they share the same high school coach. On top of that, Michigan has experience recruiting mission kids. They have one on the roster in Andrew Gentry. I don't think Bear's going to make a decision based off of that, but more so it helps Michigan knowing how to approach that situation. For those that don't know, Gatlin Berry is of the Mormon faith, so he will take a 2-year mission upon graduation, technically making him a 2026 recruit. Still, he's such a special talent. I mean, you're talking about a kid that's 6'2.5", 190 pounds, that runs in the 10.2s, which is world-class speed, faster than Nicholas Harbor from last cycle, who all we talked about was Olympic aspirations. Bear's brothers are both big-time track and field athletes at the collegiate level right now. So the good thing about Bear is he's not really looking at track. He's really focusing on football. He would fill a huge void for Michigan. It's a little unfortunate that he's technically a 2026, but in terms of his recruitment, I think Michigan's done enough, but you still have two schools closer to home that are continuing to push. One is Boise State, and obviously you don't think much when you hear Boise State if you're Michigan, but Boise State's done a tremendous job of pitching him on staying closer to home. He has a multi-day unofficial visit to Boise State planned for this coming week. So during the brief lift in the dead period, Bear will be on Boise State's campus for 2 or 3 days, I believe. It's going to be interesting to see what comes out of that visit. I wouldn't discount Boise State at all just because they're not a power program. I mean, they have done a really, really nice job in this recruitment. And the other school involved is Oregon. Now, I think Oregon's probably in third place right now. I think it's Michigan, Boise State really battling up there at the top, but you can never discount Oregon. We've seen in recent recruitment that Oregon is known to make late surges. They have a strong NIL program, and they're a popular team in general with this generation. So I feel like Oregon could be that X factor, but as things go into that first week of August decision, I would say it's Boise State and Michigan, and this Boise State visit next week will be pivotal for Bear.
Well, let's say we miss on Bear. We want another receiver in this cycle from what I understand. So can you throw a few names out there of, I hate to say plan B, but who else would we possibly go to if Bear says no?
Yeah, I mean, even if Bear says yes, Michigan would want another receiver. As I mentioned, Bear's taking a 2-year mission. So he would sign a financial aid agreement and not a national letter of intent. And, if Michigan lands Bear, that's a guy they can stash away for 2 years. But if they miss on him, it makes no difference since he's technically a 2026 in terms of how they're going to approach 2024 wide receiver recruiting. So regardless of Bear's decision, whether he picks Michigan in early August or he goes to Boise State or Oregon, Michigan wants another receiver that's actually going to sign to play for the class of 2024. At the top of the board is Ryan Wingo, 5-star wide receiver out of St. Louis. Now, he's obviously more of a long shot, but Wingo did visit twice last year. He was on campus for an official visit in June. I wouldn't be surprised if he returns for a game in the fall, but there's obviously a lot of work to do to get a 5-star wide receiver. I think right now Texas is probably in command of that recruitment. You have others really involved there, including Georgia. I think NIL will probably be a role there. Again, kind of like I mentioned with Bryce Underwood, you have a 5-star player at a premium position. That's bound to happen. Good news for Michigan is, like I said, he's likely to come back for campus. He's taking it the distance, not making the decision until December. But again, I would temper expectations there. Obviously, I think it's more of a Hail Mary than it is, a true realistic option. But aside from Ryan Wingo, there's really no names on the board right now. From what I've been told, Michigan is going to evaluate senior film and make a decision from there, probably look at those first 4 games, which are crucial in the high school season. So you could see Michigan really start to push for some guys maybe in late September, early October, based on what guys do during those first 4 games of their senior years. It could be guys we've never heard of. It could be guys they circle back on, like Mekhi White, who was considered a Michigan lean early in the cycle, but the Wolverines never really made a push there. Or it could be a guy like Keelan Adams, who's also out of Virginia, that Michigan really liked early, but decided to stay at the hometown school with Virginia Tech. And, you could have DeBron Gatling, who's down in Georgia, committed to Texas A&M, who has ties to the state of Michigan. He was originally from Detroit. He expressed some interest early and was on campus early on. So there's a few names they could circle back to. There could be names that just pop up that are real, true late risers. Michigan is going to search for a Jimmy Rolder type on the offensive side. If you remember, Michigan found Jimmy Rolder late, a couple cycles ago, and that's what they're looking to do here at wide receivers, kind of find somebody late that fits the mold of a bigger body type. Channing Goodwin and Marion Stewart are already committed, but both are more slot possession type receivers. They really want a true outside guy this cycle.
Well, one of the best safeties in this cycle recently decommitted, Jalen Hayward from Rockledge, Florida. I know he hasn't been on campus, or I don't think he's been on campus yet, but is Michigan going to pursue him?
Yeah, there's been some contact there dating back to the spring. I had a chance to see Jalen back in April, and he told me he was interested in visiting Michigan. Michigan was interested in bringing him in for an OV this summer. It didn't really work out, but I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen makes an OV in the fall. He has been connecting well with Steve Klingscale and Jesse Minter. I think he knows there's a need for players in the secondary at Michigan right now. The Wolverines have just one commit on the back end, so I think he sees that, and he's a guy that's a flex guy. He played a lot of corner when I saw him in 7-on-7. Obviously, he's listed as a safety and can play there as well. He can play the nickel. So there's a lot to like about Jalen Hayward. I do think he makes it to campus. I do think Michigan is in that mix right now. But, I think Auburn probably has the early advantage in the race after the decommitment from Georgia. There's some other Southern schools involved there. So, again, probably temper expectations a little bit, but if you get them on campus, things could get moving there.
Another big-time safety in this cycle from Florida is Daquan Patterson. He will be on campus next week. He plays in that great Chaminade program in Hollywood, Florida. But it's going to be tough to pry this kid away from the Hurricanes, isn't it, EJ?
Yeah, it was interesting, reporting on Daquan Patterson earlier this week. Initially, I was told he was going to visit Auburn, which meant it was unlikely he was going to make it to the barbecue at the Big House next weekend at Michigan. And then, about an hour later, I got a call, and it was and the source told me, he's actually going to fly into Michigan on Saturday night after visiting Auburn, and he'll spend all day Sunday on campus. So Patterson will probably miss most of the barbecue festivities, which will be taking place on Saturday, but he'll get the full day Sunday. And that's great because Michigan can give him more individual attention. I know some people saw my report and said, well, he's not going to get the barbecue experience. It's like, who really cares? It's more so giving this guy true individual attention. He'll be the only 2024 target on campus on Sunday. So he'll get, full steam ahead from Steve Klingscale, Denard Robinson, who's a South Florida native and legend, obviously. Jim Harbaugh will be able to give him extended time as well. And remember, this is his second visit in as many months. He also made an unofficial visit last month. He'll be joined on Sunday by teammate Chris Ewald, who's committed in the 2025 class and will be in his ear all weekend. So I think him leaving Auburn's Big Cat weekend early to get to Michigan speaks volumes of his interest. 2 unofficial visits, it's not really cheap to fly around and get from Miami to Ann Arbor. So I think he really loves what Michigan has to offer both on and off the field. I think this is a Michigan-Miami battle with Auburn kind of creeping up and hanging around. But, Miami's going to be tough to beat. They've been in his recruitment forever. It's the hometown school. They have a great NIL program. They've been making him a priority at the safety position, but I think Michigan has done as good of a job as you could expect with Patterson. Like I said, he's visited twice in the last couple of months. I believe he's been on campus a total of 4 times. So, he's very familiar with the program. He's expressed legitimate interest. I think having Ewald already committed is a big help. I think having Denard Robinson on staff is a big help as well. So we'll see how this visit goes next weekend. But I think the Wolverines do have a legitimate chance of stealing him away from Miami.
Well, sticking with secondary prospects, I would think Michigan would like to add another couple of corners in this class of 24, EJ. And I know we missed on a couple of really high-profile kids on the board. Any other names out there we can talk about?
I think right now the focus is really on Aaron Scott and Daquan Patterson, and to a lesser extent Jalen Hayward. I think those are probably the names to know right now. Kind of similar to what I said with wide receiver. I think Michigan's going to spend some time. Let's say they miss on Aaron Scott and Daquan Patterson, or one of the two. I think they'll spend some time just evaluating senior film. Just like the wide receiver position, they'll look for late risers. They could circle back on guys like in-state recruit Jalen Todd, who's committed to Kansas. Todd's a guy that was on campus multiple times before they kind of cooled on him. They could look at another Kansas commit, Austin Alexander, who visited for one of the junior days in the winter. They didn't really make a push there. They could go after Emilio Agard at Philadelphia St. Joseph's Prep, who just committed to Wisconsin not too long ago. He was really high on Michigan and visited for a game last year. So those are a few names, I'm just throwing out that they could circle back to that make sense. But honestly, it's really going to come down to senior film and what Klink and those guys like from those first 4 games of their senior years.
On our offensive line, we have 5 right now, 5 verbals in this class of 24. There's some talk, though, we wouldn't mind adding a 6th, and there's some pretty solid players out there we can go after, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, right now, Bennett Warren is at the top of the board, and, he's an on-300 prospect out of the Houston area. He's been to campus multiple times, including last month for an official visit, but that recruitment's just been all over the place. It's been extremely difficult to get a true read on it. He named Michigan his leader after the spring game, then he backtracked on it. Then he made his OV to Michigan. He renamed Michigan his leader. Then he backtracked on that. Tennessee's gained some recent momentum, but it seems like there's a divide in the family about Tennessee. You've had Oklahoma and Texas A&M also involved, and normally you would think that a Texas kid would probably just end up at one of those two if the recruitment is unclear. But Bennett Warren's not a true Texas kid. He didn't move there until a couple of years ago. He actually still has a Baltimore number, I think. So, he's not a guy that's just going to go to A&M because there's home state pressure. He's not really from there, or same thing with Oklahoma. But those two schools are really involved as well. Like I said, there's just been so many changes in this recruitment. Leader, no leader, leader, no leader. It's just at this point, it's just really hard to tell where Bennett Warren is going to land. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up at any of the 4 schools I just mentioned, including Michigan. But if it's not Michigan, and right now I'd probably give the slight edge to Tennessee. But like I said, you never know with this kid. If they don't land Bennett Warren, then I think staying put with 5 would be fine, but they would still explore a potential 6 offensive lineman, depending. It would have to be the right guy. They're not going to just take a 6 guy to take one, but they are exploring a few others, including Jordan Seaton, who's a 5-star prospect. He's a top 30 player in the country at an IMG Academy. They got him on campus 2 years ago when he was an underclassman. Sharon Moore was back in contact this spring. That one's going to be a really tough pool. But, I think we would have to wait and see if anybody pops up that Sharon Moore really likes. But right now, the focus is more so on Bennett Warren and seeing what his twist and turn recruitment turns out with.
Here with us today on our game day segment as we talk recruiting, mostly the class of 24 is EJ Holland from the Wolverine ON3. EJ, at nose guard, we missed on Scott, lost him to Ohio State. Then David Polly chose USC. Where do we go next at that position?
Yeah, nose is another one, just like wide receiver and corner with, top targets flying off the board. I think that they're just going to have to reset and reevaluate some guys during the early parts of their senior seasons. I mean, they could circle back on a guy like Jasir Whittington out of Philadelphia, Imhotep Charter, same school that produced Samaj Bridgman last cycle. He's the guy they offered early that's committed to Pitt, so they could take a look at him. There are a few others, but it's hard to find nose guys, true nose guys. One guy they really like is Jericho Johnson, who's an on-300 prospect out of California. They were on him super early before he was even ranked. They've visited his high school on multiple occasions. They just haven't been able to get him on campus. So, maybe that happens in the fall. He would definitely be a priority if he expresses more interest. But, like I said, it might be circling back to guys like Whittington. It might be some late risers. So right now I think there's no real 100% plan at the nose position, just like there isn't, in the secondary if they miss on some of these guys, or at the wide receiver position. I think this is where the recruiting department's going to be key, chopping up film for the assistants and seeing who they can find late.
Well, one thing you cannot account for at this time in the cycle is how many of these verbals Michigan missed on can maybe be flipped back, or how many you keep evaluating. Does Michigan, though, stay on some of these kids like a Justin Scott, for example, and maybe try before December to get them back?
Yeah, I mean, you never know what can happen later on in the cycle, especially if Michigan has another big season on the field, which is fully expected if they beat Ohio State for the third straight year, especially in the Big House in front of, what I would expect, a big list of recruits. Then, yeah, I think Michigan can turn the tide. Right now it seems unlikely that they would flip a Justin Scott or somebody like that, but you never know. I mean, the later the cycle goes, the more, Michigan has a chance, just because they'll be a consistent contender for the college football playoff, and you never know what can happen at some of these other programs. I think Jim Harbaugh has obviously built a fantastic winning culture, and I think Michigan's a safe bet to not only have a big season, but just to have consistency. And I think right now, again, it probably seems a little unlikely with a lot of these guys, but, come November, things could definitely change. I think one guy that I've mentioned that I'm particularly going to be monitoring is Boo Carter. It came down to Tennessee and Michigan. He picked Tennessee. Tennessee was the hometown school. They have a strong NIL program, but he's a guy that just had such a great relationship with Steve Klingscale. He spent the offseason playing club 7-on-7 with Michigan commit Jacob Oden. He also spent some time with the Sound Mind, Sound Body program, which we talked about earlier. So, yeah, I think Boo Carter would definitely be one to watch. I've kind of likened his recruitment to Keon Sabb. Keon, as a recruit, was committed to Clemson, but continued to kind of flirt with Michigan. And then he got on campus late in the year and ultimately ended up flipping to Michigan. And I'm not saying that's going to be the exact case with Boo Carter, but I do see some similarities between those recruitments. So Boo Carter's one I would keep an eye on, as far as other guys like, David Pale or Justin Scott or, guys like that. I think we won't really know anything on those guys until later in the year, or even in Aaron Scott, if he picks Ohio State, and let's say Ohio State, with them filling the quarterback position with a kind of an unknown, if they struggle a little bit, you never know. So we'll just have to wait and see how the season plays out.
The updated On3 industry rankings came out last week, and commits Micah Kaapana, Jaden Smith, Manuel Bagel moved up, linebacker Zachary Ludwig, and quarterback Jaden Davis took a tumble. At this time of the year, how do these recruiting services qualify that kind of movement up or down for these kids?
The live evaluations are a justification of what you see on film. So when you see these guys on junior film, that gives you a great idea of what you can rank them. And then seeing them again in person it adds that extra evaluation. Like, there's a reason that the Michigan staff or any staff across the country takes time during the spring evaluation period to spend basically every day from April 15th to May 31st on the road looking at these kids in shorts and shirts. It's to match up what they see on film. Are these guys the right height? Are these guys the right weight? How long are they really? How quick twitch are they really? What do they look like running, not just in a straight line, side to side movement? They can evaluate, more intricate details. Like, I remember I was on the road with Mike McDonald and he was talking to me about ankle flexibility, and just like, man, this was over my head. I think just getting out there and seeing guys, matching up what you see on film and matching up what you might still have questions about. I think like a prospect like Jaden Davis as well. I think he just has a super high floor, but you look at progression from sophomore to junior to going into a senior season, and you might not see a lot of projection just because he is a high floor prospect. He hasn't gotten any taller. He's still under 6'1". He has limited athleticism. He's not a guy that exactly scares defenses with his legs, and he has a bit of a lower throwing motion that caught some attention at some off-season events. But at the same time, he's still really efficient. He had a strong junior year. He has, a great football IQ. He's a high-level processor. And so, he gives you a base, but he's not exactly projecting as that 5-star that we may have looked at him as an underclassman when, he was kind of lighting it up as early as the 8th grade. And you were like, wow, this guy could really turn into something. And while he's turned into something, he's still a really, really good prospect. He's not exactly that 5-star caliber prospect. And you can see that based on his junior film and then going into some of these off-season workouts and off-season competitions that he's competed in. And then on the flip side of the coin, you look at a guy like Devin Baxter, and his junior film isn't, super amazing. But you also have to consider this is a guy that is just really raw. He started off playing quarterback, and he'll still play quarterback for his high school team. And then he transitioned to tight end, and then he eventually ended up at edge. He plays at Gwynn Park, so it's not exactly a DMV power or anything. It's not even remotely close to Baltimore, which is where they had his high school listed initially. So it's kind of out by the wayside. And you go out there and you watch him in workouts, and you know what Ben Herbert is capable of in the strength and conditioning program, and you know what Mike Elston is capable of as a developer of talent, and you see the length and you see the athleticism, him running routes and sinking his hips and getting in and out of breaks on offense, and then you see him going through defensive workouts and you see him putting that length to use, and just his body frame. I mean, he's close to 6'6", 240 pounds, and you watch him move around and you see the projectability. You see, okay, this is a guy that has way more of a ceiling than, a guy that's a high floor guy. I hate to compare offense to defense, but you see Jaden Davis has more of that limited ceiling. He's kind of capped out a little bit. You know what you're getting with him. With Devin Baxter, the sky is the limit. So, you see that when you go out and do these in-person evaluations, and the fact that he's committed to Michigan, makes me even more excited. Like, I was already really high on Devin Baxter, and then seeing him again yesterday and seeing the way he's continuing to progress as just a raw talent is something that I look at and I say, yeah, this is a kid that Michigan's going to turn into an absolute monster that maybe necessarily wasn't coming off a super high junior season, but I have really high expectations for him as a senior. So, hopefully that explains some of it. I know that was kind of a long-winded answer.
Well, the last big event before practice actually gets underway is the barbecue at the Big House. That's next weekend. It might not be what it used to be, but what it is still a really important recruiting tool, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the barbecue at the Big House is still really important, especially for the 2025 recruiting class. You're going to have a lot of big-time players on campus for next cycle, and that's great. Look, I mean, Michigan has filled out this class much earlier than usual. I released my initial post-official visit hot board yesterday over at the Wolverine, and it had the names that we talked about on this podcast, and that's just a handful of guys, right? There's 26 commits. You only have about 4 or 5 more spots, so there isn't much left to do in 2024. Now, that gives Michigan the advantage of being able to put together a very special 2025 recruiting class, and you look at the early visitors list for next week, and I mean, it's loaded. You could have Bryce Underwood back on campus. That's not confirmed yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if he gets back on campus. David Sanders, the number 1 offensive tackle in the country, 5-star out of Providence Day, same school as Jaden Davis and Channing Goodwin. He's coming in for his first visit. You have DJ Pickett, the number 1 safety in the country, 5-star prospect out of Central Florida. He's a kid that's been on campus on multiple occasions. This will be his 3rd visit. He was also on campus in June. So you have the potential for 3 early 5-star prospects on campus, and there's several other on 300 recruits expected on campus in the 2025 class. So I think Michigan has a chance to put together a really special 25 class. I think people had higher expectations than what the 2024 class will probably finish. Right now, they're ranked number 5. I think they'll probably end up somewhere in that back end of the top 10. But I think 2025, if Michigan wins again on the field, if they can get NIL rolling, which we always say, then I do think next cycle can be a firm top 5 class. There are just so many heavy hitters coming in for the barbecue, which we haven't necessarily seen in years past for the cycle coming up. So it will be really, really 2025 heavy, but at the same time, that's great for Michigan just because they're getting more of a jump start on the underclassmen than they normally do.
Well, EJ, a couple of general recruiting questions I have for you I thought our listeners would find interesting. You're on the road a lot of the time watching these kids compete in camps and then during the fall and the season. On your Wolverine podcast this week, you were asked, what 4 or 5 high school programs consistently provide the most talented players. And if you don't mind, can you run down that list for our listeners?
Yeah, that was off the top of my head, so I guess I'll do it off the top of my head again. The best league in the country is the Trinity League down in Southern California. It has some of the best high school programs in the country. You think about high school football, you automatically think about Modern Day and St. John Bosco. I mean, both of those programs produce elite talent year in and year out. Modern Day, obviously, being the home school of Bryce Young, who went number 1 in the draft. So both of those California schools produce a ton of talent. Michigan was down there this spring. They lost Courtney Morgan, obviously, so they don't really have a true West Coast guy, but Jay Harbaugh has done a fantastic job of kind of stepping in, being the area recruiter out west. They kind of just gave the keys to Jay Harbaugh and said, here you go, here's the Western United States. So and Kirk Campbell's been down there as well, but they're trying to get some underclassmen out of Modern Day and St. John Bosco. They sent out, a number of offers at both of those schools, but, it starts off there. And I explained it on the podcast, but that was such a big reason I was so high on Mason Graham coming out of high school, and much higher on others than others on Mason Graham, just because he was dominating in the best league in the country. When I went out to see him play for Servite, it was against Modern Day, and he had a really, really impressive showing there. So, yeah, anytime you can pull a guy out of the Trinity League that is extremely productive, I think it's a safe bet that they'll be productive at the college level as well. IMG Academy is obviously, shouldn't even count, to be honest. Yeah. IMG Academy pulls kids from all over the country. You actually have a couple of in-staters heading down there now. On 300 offensive lineman Caden Strayhorn is originally from Michigan, and he's down at IMG. Alex Graham, a top 100 corner, from Cass Tech is transferring out to IMG this season. So, they're pulling in kids from the state of Michigan. They're pulling in kids from all over the country, and they're just a national powerhouse. It's kind of unfair just because they recruit everywhere and they get the top talent, across the nation. And obviously Michigan's had success at IMG in the past. JJ McCarthy spent a year there during the COVID situation in Chicago. So, IMG is always going to be a big school. Jay Harbaugh and Steve Klinkscale both spent some time there in the spring. You have Baltimore St. Francis, which is very familiar for Michigan fans, being the home school of guys like Blake Corum and Derek Moore. And obviously you had Biff there for a while. But St. Francis is playing the toughest schedule in the country this fall. They have several talented underclassmen. Michigan has offered, I believe, somewhere between 10 and 15 2025 and 2026 prospects at St. Francis. There probably won't be a St. Francis kid this cycle, but they are absolutely loaded in the 25 and 26 classes. One of my favorite recruits in 25 is Blake Woodby. He's a top 100 corner. Michigan's trying to get him on campus here pretty soon, but he's one of my favorite guys. But St. Francis is such a great program. I always enjoy spending time with Coach Masai and the guys out there. I mean, when you say, hey, I want some dogs on the roster, you go to St. Francis, you get guys out of Baltimore. And I think and all the guys that, for the most part have come to Michigan from St. Francis have had some success, obviously, especially Blake Corum. But I think St. Francis just kind of breeds that, winner's mentality that, you have to really get out of it to be successful. And so I really like what St. Francis produces. And then obviously there are just, some other high-powered programs across the country that I would mention would be, Bergen Catholic in New Jersey always has some good talent. Chaminade Madonna down where Daquan Patterson and Chris Ewald has some great talent. Las Vegas Bishop Gorman, which is home to Micah Kaapana, has some great talent as well. They're consistently, a top 10 program in the country. And I think that's a big reason, why Kapana could explode in the rankings this fall. He's going to be the full-time starter for Bishop Gorman, playing against the best high school teams in the country. I'm a Texas guy, so I'm partial to Texas schools. You look at schools like Allen and DeSoto and, the major powerhouses in the Dallas area, and all of those programs are great. I think the difference between Texas and some of the schools I mentioned is all those Texas schools are public schools, so they can't really recruit as much as, people like to say Texas schools recruit. They actually don't recruit very much since it is public. But the DeSotos, the Duncanvilles, the South Oak Cliffs, the Allens are all great schools to pull talent from. Obviously, Michigan had a couple of DeSoto kids on their roster, Jamon Green and German Green. So, those are, some of the schools off the top of my head that I can think of that are, some of the better programs in the country. And the one other is Buford down in Georgia. Obviously, Michigan has a commit there in 2025 in Mantress Walker. But, I covered Buford back when I was on the Texas beat, and they've just exploded with high-level recruits, way more than, when I covered them back then. So they've turned into a perennial power. Jim Harbaugh made sure to stop there personally. Back when head coaches were allowed to travel, I believe that was the winter. Jesse Minter was back there in the spring. So, they've really invested in recruiting Buford for the future.
Well, another question I get a lot is why don't we get more players from the state of Michigan? And I mean, I think it covers all age groups asking that question, because when you look at it, we're one of the 10 biggest states in the union with over 10 million residents. So, I mean, you're around it a lot. You hear what coaches say. Do you think high school football is good or underrated in Michigan, or just not what it could be?
I think high school football is good in Michigan. I mean, I don't think it's amazing. I think if you're the University of Michigan and you recruit on a national level, then, you're only going to want so many kids from, your backyard. I think it's important to get those kids. I think it's important to get, the Bryce Underwoods and the Donovan Edwards and the Will Johnsons of the world. But I think when you look at recruiting in Michigan, it's top heavy, right? You have, maybe numbers 1 through 6 are really, really good. And then after that, it's not exactly Michigan level, but that's not necessarily a knock on the state of Michigan. There are really quality players that end up playing at other programs. It's just, it's the University of Michigan. You can't take everybody, right? You only want the best of the best. So I think the numbers 1 through 6 are probably what Michigan looks for. And they might take a chance on a sleeper outside of that range, or a guy they really like that's a culture fit, like Samaj Morgan last cycle, or, someone like that. But I think when you look at the state of Michigan, it's been great the last few cycles as far as having a really high level player. We went from Donovan Edwards to Will Johnson to Dante Moore. There was a little bit of a gap this year, and then next year you have Bryce Underwood. But I think Michigan does fine. I think they've kind of rebuilt a lot of recruiting bridges in the state of Michigan, specifically in the Detroit Metro, with the hirings of Ron Bellamy and Steve Clinkscale. Both of those guys have done fantastic jobs of building relationships around the area. Mike Hart has been really involved in the area as well. So, to answer your question, why doesn't Michigan get more kids in Michigan from Michigan? They don't have to. They only have to get the guys they really, really want. And, so far this cycle, I think they've, for the most part, gotten the guys they've really, really wanted out of the state. If you look at top 6 or so guys in the state this cycle, and I'm not doing this off the top of my head. I actually pulled up my computer so I could look. If you look at the top 6 guys in the state of Michigan this cycle, it's CJ Carr, who Michigan passed on for Jaden Davis. Brady Prescorn, they landed. Nick Marsh, they never pushed for. Jacob Oden, they landed. Brandon Davis Swain was always on the back burner, and Jeremiah Beasley they wanted and landed, right? So they got half of the top 6, and the 3 guys they didn't get, they didn't really push for. So I think that's completely fine and then after that, after the top 6, it's guys they didn't even offer, really, or guys they could circle back on later, like Jalen Todd, who I mentioned earlier. But I think it varies cycle to cycle. I think this was kind of a weaker year in the state of Michigan, but even for the most part, you're going to want those top 6 to focus on, and all 6 might not really even be priorities like I just ran through. So I think Michigan got the guys they wanted in state this cycle, and I don't think the state of Michigan produces enough talent to support taking 5 or 6 or 7 guys from the state every year.
Well, final question before we let you get away, EJ. Big 10 Media Days next week. It takes place at Lucas Oil Field, and I'm not sure if you're going or not, but I think for most of us, this event signals the start of another season, and it just really has become a lot of fun to watch, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's great that the season's right around the corner. I personally won't be there, but I know our team guys, Anthony Broom, Clayton Safety, and Chris Ballas, who do a fantastic job of covering the team, will be there, and we'll bring a ton of coverage to the Wolverine.com. But I think it kind of signifies the start of college football. It's right around the corner. I'm excited to see what Michigan does. Obviously, a lot of high expectations, and I'm sure I'll be at a couple of games in the Big House this fall. I'm excited about the high school season as well. Obviously, for me, I don't get to see every Michigan game since I'm out on the road seeing high school games. For me, I think the date I have circled on my calendar is August 12th. That's the first scrimmage weekend, and then we really get into it. And so you have a few weeks of high school football before you really get into college football. But it's great that the season's right around the corner. I even went out, like I said, I went out to see Devin Baxter yesterday just to make sure the camera was still working, just to kind of start getting back in the groove of things. And it's exciting that this season's almost here.
Well, yeah, it's coming up fast. You always know it is when you get your Wolverine preview issue in the mail, and I have mine right in front of me. Use it all season and love it. Also, I'm on the Wolverine On3 every day. I don't know how any Michigan fan doesn't subscribe, but the season's right around the corner. So for those out there, my listeners who have not subscribed to the Wolverine On3, any deals before the season gets started?
I believe we will be running a promotion here once we get into August. If you can't wait until August and you want to get your fix in right now, you can subscribe to the Wolverine.com at the full price, which is $99.99 for a year or $9.99 per month. Or you could just, try to get that monthly. What I would advise, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, what I would advise is get your monthly subscription, try it out for $9.99. At this point, $10 is less than a McDonald's meal. Like, I stopped just to get a snack at McDonald's the other day. I got some nuggets. It was like $10.
Yeah.
I was like, what's going on? What happened to the dollar menu? But anyway, I would suggest getting a subscription for a month, trying it out at $9.99, and then if you want to get the full year, I'm sure we can I'm sure we will be running some promotions in August. So I would highly suggest taking advantage of the $9.99 monthly rate for the next few weeks, as we kind of close out getting into media days. And then, once we run that promo, I'm sure that you guys can sign up for that annual subscription at a discounted rate. So no real promo right now, but I think that's probably the best way to get around it.
It's well worth it. So to any of my listeners who are not subscribers to either the magazine or the Wolverine On3, I say check it out, because just football season alone will let you know that you should be a subscriber, because you can't live without it. At least I can't live without it. So check it out. Here with us today, as we've been talking recruiting and more, has been the outstanding recruiting writer from the Wolverine On3, EJ Holland. EJ, always great having you on the show. You're very generous with your time. We thank you and look forward to our next visit.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
On Quick Hits today, as I mentioned at the top of the show, practice starts in just about a week, and we'll begin our month of previews with our Michigan beat writers and media personalities. Until then, enjoy all of the coverage of Media Days on BTN, because soon it will be time to tee it up. That does it for now. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great weekend, everyone. Make sure you tell your Wolverine friends and family about the show, and if they aren't subscribers, tell them to hurry up and subscribe. We're free and available from iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcast from. A reminder to like us on Facebook, follow on Twitter, and leave a comment or rating after you listen to the show. And thank you in advance. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!